The concrete pier at Yokohama Harbor stretched into gray waters under heavy August clouds. 6 days had passed since Emperor Hirohito's surrender announcement. The war was over, but for one young American soldier, the real mission was just beginning. Robert Hartley shifted his duffel bag across his shoulder. The private first class from the 11th Airborne Division had sailed across the Pacific, carrying more than standard military equipment. Deep inside his bag, wrapped in careful layers of waxed paper, lay his secret weapon. 32 Hershey bars purchased with his own pay at the Okinawa PX. What happened when those chocolate bars reached the hands of terrified Japanese children would reshape everything. The Americans called it Operation Sweetness. The Japanese would remember it as the miracle that changed hearts. The transformation had begun before anyone realized it. Military planners had prepared for resistance. They had studied maps and calculated troop requirements. They had drafted regulations and printed proclamations. What they hadn't anticipated was the power of simple human kindness. Terror gripped every corner of Japan that August morning. The civilian population lived in absolute dread. Months of government propaganda had painted horrifying pictures of what American occupation would bring. Official broadcasts had been explicit in their warnings. The evidence sat in captured documents that would later shock Allied intelligence officers. Ministry of War radio transmissions throughout July had repeated the same terrifying message. American soldiers would show no mercy. Men would be executed without trial. Women would face unspeakable violations. Children would be enslaved or murdered outright. Death was preferable to American rule. The propaganda had worked with devastating effectiveness. In Tokyo's Shinjuku ward, municipal records would later reveal that 847 families had abandoned their homes entirely. They had fled to mountain villages, carrying only what they could manage. Better to starve in the wilderness than face American brutality. Osaka presented an even more dramatic picture. Police reports documented over 1,200 women who had shaved their heads completely bald. They dressed as men, hoping to avoid detection. Some had rubbed dirt into their faces and worn their husbands' clothes. Anything to escape the fate they believed awaited them. Villages across Japan stood empty. Families had gathered their most precious possessions and vanished into the countryside. They left behind everything they couldn't carry. Houses sat abandoned with meals half finished on tables. Children's toys lay scattered in empty courtyards. Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Wainwright documented the eerie silence during those first weeks. His Civil Affairs Division reports painted pictures of ghost towns where life had simply stopped. In Kanagawa Prefecture, entire communities had dissolved overnight. Food supplies rotted in kitchens. Personal belongings gathered dust in shuttered homes. The scope of civilian flight staggered occupation forces. They had expected resistance. They had prepared for sabotage and guerrilla warfare. Instead, they found emptiness. A nation had chosen flight over fight. MacArthur's headquarters had anticipated this psychological challenge. Supreme Commander Allied Powers staff had spent months developing policies specifically designed to address civilian fears. General Order No. 12 had been distributed to every unit before landing. The language was unusually specific for a military directive. Personnel were explicitly authorized to provide food items to Japanese children from personal rations. No threatening gestures toward civilians would be tolerated under any circumstances. All interactions must be conducted with dignity and complete respect. The final provision represented a radical departure from standard occupation doctrine. The reasoning behind these orders emerged from extensive studies. Office of War Information analysts had spent over a year examining Japanese psychology. Their conclusions were clear. Civilian cooperation would determine occupation success or failure. Hostile populations would require massive garrison forces indefinitely. Cooperative populations would enable rapid demobilization and reconstruction. But the architects of occupation policy had missed something crucial. They had focused on official programs and systematic approaches. They had overlooked the weapon that American soldiers carried in their pockets every day, something issued with standard field rations since 1943 that would prove more powerful than any policy directive. The D-ration chocolate bar had been developed by Hershey under military contract. It was designed to provide quick energy and boost morale during combat. No one had considered its potential as an instrument of peace. September morning sunlight filtered through clouds over Yokosuka Naval Base. Sergeant William Patterson of the 1st Cavalry Division's Military Police Detachment faced his first real test of the new fraternization policies. For 3 straight mornings, he had observed the same troubling sight near the base perimeter fence. 7 Japanese children gathered there each dawn. Their ages appeared to range from perhaps 4 years to 9. They maintained careful distance from the fence itself. Any approach by American personnel sent them scattering like frightened birds. Patterson's daily reports documented their presence with growing concern. The children wore clothing that barely deserved the name, rags held together by careful mending. Several had no shoes at all. All showed obvious signs of severe malnutrition. The decision Patterson made that September morning would be replicated thousands of times across occupied Japan. He had received no specific orders about this situation. His training provided no guidance for dealing with hungry enemy children who appeared more terrified than threatening. He approached the fence slowly. His hands remained visible and completely empty. He spoke in calm, gentle tones, though he knew they understood no English. The children watched him with wide, frightened eyes. From his field jacket pocket, Patterson withdrew 4 Tootsie Rolls from his combat rations. He placed them carefully on the ground just inside the fence. Then he stepped back 20 feet and waited. The oldest child, a girl who appeared about 9, approached with extreme caution. She examined the candy carefully before retreating to consult with the others. They whispered together in rapid Japanese. Finally, the girl unwrapped one piece and took a tiny, tentative bite. Patterson would never forget what happened next. The girl's expression transformed completely. Suspicion melted into wonder. She immediately broke the candy into pieces and shared them with the younger children. Within minutes, all 4 Tootsie Rolls had been consumed. The children did not approach any closer to the fence. But they did not run away. They simply sat there, looking at Patterson with something approaching curiosity rather than terror. The next morning, 12 children waited at the fence. This pattern exploded across every American installation in Japan during September. At Itazuki Airfield, Army Air Force personnel reported identical encounters. At Camp Drake in Saitama, infantry units documented similar scenarios. Children appeared wherever American soldiers were stationed. Captain Donald Fitzgerald of the 27th Infantry Division attempted to quantify what was occurring. His Civil Affairs section compiled reports from military police units, quartermaster personnel, and line companies throughout the Tokyo-Yokohama area. The numbers staggered him. American soldiers were distributing between 50,000 and 75,000 pieces of candy daily to Japanese children. This distribution was entirely unofficial. It came from personal rations rather than organized relief efforts. Soldiers were spending their own money at post exchanges to purchase additional candy, specifically for Japanese children. Quartermaster Corps' reports revealed the scale of this voluntary effort. Candy sales at military exchanges had increased 340% above projected levels. The Hershey Chocolate Company received emergency requests to increase production for Pacific Theater distribution. Japanese civilian attitudes were transforming with remarkable speed. Civil Intelligence Section monitoring revealed that fear was decreasing far faster than psychological warfare specialists had predicted possible. The reason cited most frequently in civilian interviews was simple: unexpected kindness from American soldiers, particularly toward children. Private First Class James Donnelly discovered just how profound this transformation could be. His 188th Parachute Infantry Regiment squad was conducting damage assessment patrols through Tokyo's Sugamo district when they encountered something that challenged every assumption about enemy populations. 32 children had gathered in what remained of a neighborhood school courtyard. The March firebombing raids had reduced the building to rubble, but the concrete courtyard remained intact. The children had organized themselves with remarkable discipline, despite having no visible adult supervision. Donnelly's patrol report filed that evening described children ranging from age 5 to 13. Their clothing showed careful maintenance despite severe damage. Several were barefoot. All displayed obvious malnutrition signs. Squad interpreter Sergeant Roy Yamamoto approached and conducted conversations that revealed the situation's complexity. These were war orphans. Their parents had died in the bombing campaigns or from subsequent starvation and disease. They had formed a mutual survival group, sharing whatever food they could scavenge. The oldest boy, perhaps 13, served as their leader. Through Yamamoto, he explained that they gathered daily in the school courtyard because it felt normal. Like the world before, war had destroyed everything they knew. They had no food that day, nothing the previous day either. They expected American soldiers might kill them, but had nowhere else to go. Donnelly made a decision with no basis in regulations. He ordered his entire squad to empty their ration supplies. Every C ration, every chocolate bar, every piece of candy and chewing gum from personal stores went to the children. The battalion report documented this unauthorized distribution with clinical precision. 48 C ration units, 32 chocolate bars, approximately 200 pieces of candy and gum. The children accepted everything with formal bows and expressions of gratitude. Not one piece was consumed immediately. Instead, the 13-year-old leader divided everything into precisely equal portions. Yamamoto reported that the boy stated they would make the food last 4 days if careful. He asked if the Americans would return. Donnelly promised they would. The following day brought additional rations purchased with squad members' own pay. They continued daily visits for 3 weeks until civilian relief organizations could assume responsibility. This pattern replicated across Tokyo with stunning consistency. By late September, Civil Affairs Division identified 147 documented locations where soldiers had initiated unofficial feeding programs. The Supreme Commander Allied Powers Headquarters faced an unprecedented situation. American soldiers were spending personal funds to feed former enemy civilians outside all official channels. The phenomenon that analysts now called candy diplomacy had evolved beyond individual initiatives. Major General William Chase of the 1st Cavalry Division requested guidance from MacArthur's headquarters on October 3rd. Intelligence reports revealed that Japanese civilian attitudes were changing at rates that contradicted every psychological warfare model. Standard occupation theory projected 12 to 18 months before hostile populations would accept occupying forces as anything other than oppressors. In Japan, that timeline had collapsed to mere weeks. The primary catalyst was documented in systematic civilian interviews. Unexpected kindness from American soldiers toward children. Translation services processed thousands of testimonies. The same phrases appeared repeatedly. The American soldiers give candy to our children. They smile at our little ones. They treat our children with gentleness. Statistical analysis revealed the scale of unofficial relief efforts. By early October, estimated daily candy distribution exceeded 200,000 pieces across all occupied territories. This figure included only documented observations. Actual numbers were certainly higher. Military post exchanges were ordering candy at levels 400% above authorized consumption. The Hershey Company received emergency contracts to increase production. Wrigley reported similar requests for chewing gum supplies. Private Eugene Hammond's personal journal provided insight into soldier motivations. His October 7th entry explained his reasoning with startling clarity. We spent 3 years learning to hate the Japanese. We were told they were subhuman monsters deserving extermination. Then we got here and found hungry kids who look at us like we're going to kill them. Every chocolate bar I give out feels like I'm proving the propaganda wrong. These are just people. The kids are just kids. This sentiment appeared in 43% of surveyed soldier correspondence during September and October. Letters describing interactions with Japanese children dominated mail flowing back to America. The Japanese government recognized the strategic implications. Captured cabinet meeting minutes revealed that Prime Minister Higashikuni's administration understood American treatment of children was undermining years of militarist propaganda more effectively than any occupation directive. Interior Ministry reports noted that civilian resistance had essentially collapsed in areas where Americans regularly interacted with children. Areas with minimal contact maintained higher fear and hostility levels. The correlation was unmistakable. MacArthur's headquarters responded with General Order No. 27 on October 12th. The directive officially recognized and endorsed soldier-initiated charitable activities toward Japanese civilians, particularly children. Post-exchange facilities could be used to purchase items for distribution. Organized unit-level relief efforts were permitted within specified guidelines. Corporal Daniel Kowalski tested these new boundaries on October 18th. His service company convoy was transporting supplies through Tokyo's Ueno district when they encountered an improvised civilian marketplace in commercial district ruins. Approximately 200 Japanese civilians had gathered to trade remaining possessions for food. Kowalski's transport carried 40 cases of chocolate bars and 30 cases of hard candy destined for military warehouses. The scene confronting him was documented in his evening incident report. Elderly civilians were trading family heirlooms and precious photographs for handfuls of rice. Children watched with hollow eyes as parents negotiated for food that might last 2 days. Kowalski violated direct orders regarding supply security. He halted the convoy and began distributing chocolate bars and candy directly to children. His report stated he distributed approximately 960 chocolate bars and 720 pieces of candy before resuming transport duties. Lieutenant Harrison Webb arrived 30 minutes later, investigating reports of unauthorized distribution. His report described Japanese civilians bowing repeatedly toward the departing convoy. Children clutched chocolate bars while crying. Elderly civilians approached his jeep to express gratitude in broken English. Webb faced the central tension in occupation policy. Kowalski had clearly violated regulations. The distributed supplies were valued at approximately 200 $200. Protocol demanded disciplinary action, but Webb had witnessed civilian response and understood the strategic implications. His recommendation stated that Kowalski's actions had generated more goodwill than official propaganda could achieve. Japanese civilians were openly discussing American generosity and questioning their government's wartime characterizations. Brigadier General Courtney Whitney's response established precedent. His October 25th Frankfurt memorandum stated that while unauthorized distribution couldn't be officially condoned, commanders could exercise discretion when soldier actions advanced occupation objectives. Kowalski received no punishment. His initiative was cited as effective soldier-level diplomacy. The Civil Affairs Division documented 47 similar incidents through November. In 43 cases, commanders declined disciplinary action, citing positive impact on civilian cooperation. Occupation policy was being written on Japanese streets, where soldiers made split-second decisions about treating former enemies. First Lieutenant Albert Zimmerman brought academic rigor to analyzing these phenomena. The sociology professor turned civil affairs officer conducted structured interviews with 234 Japanese civilians across multiple demographics. His findings challenged every assumption about occupied populations. Japanese civilians who had received candy or witnessed distribution to children showed measurably different attitudes toward occupation forces. Zimmerman quantified this using a cooperation index measuring willingness to provide information, compliance with directives, and expressed attitudes toward Americans. Civilians with direct candy-related contact scored 8.7 on his 10-point scale. Those without such contact averaged 4.2. The statistical significance was overwhelming. Simple chocolate bars were producing measurable behavioral changes that sophisticated propaganda had failed to achieve. Case studies supported the statistics. One Kawasaki neighborhood where medical units had distributed candy during health inspections showed 94% cooperation with tuberculosis screening. Nearby areas without candy distribution achieved only 23% participation. The mechanism was cognitive dissonance resolution. Japanese civilians had been conditioned to expect brutal American conquerors. Soldiers giving candy to children created psychological dissonance that could only be resolved by rejecting the propaganda narrative entirely. Mrs. Tanaka from Kawasaki explained through interpreters, "They told us Americans would murder our children. Instead, they give them sweets and smile. Everything the government told us was a lie. If they lied about Americans, what else was a lie?" Home Ministry internal reports documented propaganda collapse with alarm. Civilian faith in government information had suffered catastrophic deterioration directly attributable to contrasts between predicted and observed American behavior. Zimmerman recommended formal candy distribution programs as civil affairs operations. The cost would be minimal compared to military government operations. The return in civilian cooperation would be substantial. MacArthur's headquarters received the report on November 12th. Within 2 weeks, implementation guidelines for systematic candy distribution were drafted for all occupied territories. The Civilian Morale Enhancement Program launched on November 28th under Captain Richard Holloway's coordination. Civil Affairs Directive No. 43 established systematic candy distribution as official occupation activity. Each division received monthly allocations separate from troop rations. The quantities were substantial. The 1st Cavalry Division alone received authorization for 50,000 chocolate bars and 75,000 pieces of hard candy monthly for civilian distribution. Implementation guidelines balanced military efficiency with cultural sensitivity. Distribution occurred at designated locations and times. Soldiers received training in basic Japanese courtesy. Children received priority, while elderly civilians weren't excluded. All activities maintained dignity and respect. Programs expanded beyond candy distribution into organized recreation. At Osaka's Tennoji district, Lieutenant Jennifer Morrison established friendship circles, where medical personnel and children gathered weekly. Nurses distributed candy, provided basic screening, and taught English while learning Japanese. Results were measurable and dramatic. Areas with active programs showed 89% civilian cooperation with occupation directives. Crime rates were 67% lower. Reports of civilian hostility essentially disappeared. Japanese educators began requesting American soldier classroom visits. School principals in Osaka, Kyoto, and Kobe explained that children wanted to meet the kind soldiers who shared sweets. These visits created powerful effects, far exceeding their modest cost. Private Thomas Richardson described a school visit in his November 30th letter home. Japanese children who had been taught to fear Americans were now laughing and playing games while sharing chocolate bars. "They're just kids," Richardson wrote. "They want the same things kids everywhere want. They want to feel safe and have enough to eat and play games. The war makes no sense when you see their faces." Japanese press coverage reflected the transformation. The Asahi Shimbun ran articles documenting candy distributions across Tokyo. November 27th's headline read, "American Soldiers Bring Sweetness to Bitter Days." Stories described soldiers spending personal money to purchase candy for orphans. Media monitoring documented 4 to 5 positive stories daily about American soldiers across major publications by month's end. The strategic implications were analyzed in Brigadier General Kenneth Kramer's comprehensive assessment. His December 3rd report stated that candy programs had achieved civilian cooperation levels, typically requiring 12 to 18 months through conventional military government. The culmination occurred during an event that would have been unthinkable 4 months earlier. MacArthur authorized a Christmas celebration for Japanese orphans at Hibiya Park, adjacent to Imperial Palace grounds. The symbolism was deliberate and profound. Major Caroline Bradford's Civil Affairs Division coordinated unprecedented cooperation between occupation forces and Japanese authorities. American units across Tokyo contributed resources. The 1st Cavalry provided transportation. The 11th Airborne supplied tents and equipment. Quartermaster units allocated 10,000 chocolate bars, 15,000 pieces of candy, 5,000 sticks of gum, and 3,000 cookies. The Red Cross contributed clothing. Chaplains organized toy donations purchased with soldiers' personal funds. Japanese response revealed complete attitude transformation. Municipal authorities actively assisted organization. Police directed traffic and maintained order. Newspapers published announcements encouraging orphanage participation. Cooperation was voluntary and enthusiastic. December 24th brought 4,200 Japanese children to Hibiya Park under clear winter skies. They arrived from 73 orphanages across Tokyo metropolitan area. Ages ranged from 3 to 14. Many wore shoes for the first time in months, donated by American personnel. American soldiers who had fought Japanese forces months earlier distributed candy and gifts to children taught to fear them. Photographers captured images distributed worldwide, Japanese children smiling while Americans placed chocolate bars in their hands. Orphans clutching donated teddy bears. Elderly caregivers bowing in gratitude toward young privates. Chaplain Captain Harold Jensen delivered remarks translated into Japanese, emphasizing peace, reconciliation, and hope. He spoke of children as symbols of new beginnings, innocent of hatreds that caused such suffering. Japanese caregivers listened with visible emotion. Distribution maintained dignity, honoring cultural expectations. Children bowed politely when receiving gifts. American soldiers returned the bows, having received courtesy training. Mutual respect was genuine and observed by hundreds of watching civilians. Civil intelligence observers documented profound psychological impact through translated conversations. One elderly man stated, "These Americans treat our orphans with more kindness than our own government showed them. We were told they were demons. They are human beings with generous hearts." Children departed at 1600 hours with bags containing candy, cookies, and toys. Many clutched chocolate bars carefully, planning to make them last. American soldiers were visibly affected. Dozens requested permission to visit orphanages regularly to continue supporting children. Government section assessment acknowledged that the Hibiya Park event accomplished more to legitimize occupation than any military directive or propaganda campaign. Photographs appeared in Japanese newspapers December 25th and 26th. The Mainichi Shimbun headline read, "American soldiers bring Christmas joy to war orphans." January 20th, 1946, marked 5 months since surrender. Transformation from enemy nation to cooperative territory was analyzed in comprehensive assessments for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Conclusions challenged fundamental assumptions about military government and post-war reconstruction. The Civil Affairs Division's final report documented results exceeding every projection. Total confectionery items distributed between September and January, approximately 12.5 million pieces. Estimated cost, $287,000. Return on investment in civilian cooperation, incalculable. Statistical analysis was compelling. Program areas showed 91% civilian cooperation versus 54% without programs. Crime rates were 73% lower. Civilian hostility incidents were 89% lower. Simple kindness correlated directly with measurable cooperation. Personal accounts revealed transformation beyond statistics. Robert Hartley, who carried those first 32 Hershey bars into Yokohama, wrote before rotation home, "I came to Japan expecting to hate these people forever. I'm leaving, having learned that kindness is more powerful than any weapon. The children taught me that." When you give a kid a chocolate bar and see his face light up, you remember that we're all human. War makes us forget that. Peace lets us remember. Japanese perspectives collected through intelligence interviews revealed parallel transformation. Mrs. Fumiko Yamamoto, interviewed in December, stated, "I lost my husband and 2 sons in the war. I believed I would hate Americans until my death. Then American soldiers gave candy to my grandson and treated him with gentleness. My hatred could not survive their kindness. They showed me that individual human beings can be good, even when nations are at war." The phenomenon influenced global reconstruction planning. Candy distribution models were studied by occupation planners, preparing for potential conflicts in other regions. War Department strategic assessments documented the fundamental lesson. Small acts of individual kindness could accomplish strategic objectives that military force alone could never achieve. MacArthur's final report on the occupation's first year devoted significant attention to the candy phenomenon. He wrote, "The American soldiers' instinctive generosity toward children, demonstrated through the simple act of sharing candy, accomplished more to reconcile former enemies than calculated policy could have achieved. It demonstrated that in the human heart, kindness overcomes hatred, that individual compassion can bridge the deepest national divides." The legacy extended through generations. Japanese who received candy as children became leaders of post-war recovery. Many credited positive attitudes toward America to those early encounters with soldiers sharing chocolate bars. The United States-Japan alliance, one of the strongest international partnerships of the late 20th century, had roots in simple kindness during occupation's first months. Museums across Japan today feature exhibits documenting the occupation period with photographs of American soldiers distributing candy to Japanese children. These images represent truth, transcending military history. In humanity's darkest moments, individual acts of compassion can light paths toward reconciliation that seemed impossible. The streams of chocolate bars flowing into children's hands during autumn 1945 didn't just satisfy immediate hunger. They demonstrated that even after total war, even between the most bitter enemies, human capacity for kindness could overcome the deepest hatreds. They proved that the best weapon for building peace is not the sword, but the open hand offering sweetness to a child. The transformation that began with 32 Hershey bars in a soldier's duffel bag became something far greater than anyone imagined. It became proof that in the ruins of war, hope could be rebuilt one chocolate bar at a time. It showed that former enemies could become friends when kindness replaced hatred, when understanding overcame fear, when the simple act of sharing sweets with frightened children opened hearts that propaganda had tried to harden forever. What started as individual acts of soldier compassion became systematic policy that reshaped an entire nation's relationship with its former enemy. The candy that American soldiers shared didn't just feed hungry children. It nourished the seeds of lasting peace that would grow into one of history's most successful transformations, from bitter warfare to enduring alliance. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't won on any battlefield. It was won in the hearts of children who learned that their enemies were actually friends, that Americans who came as conquerors stayed as protectors, and that sometimes the most powerful weapons of war are acts of simple human kindness that remind us all of our shared humanity.